Right by Them, a Magnus Archives podfic, written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfics. Chapter 11. Deliveries. Content warnings for panic attacks and negative self-talk. John was finally able to settle back into his chair, already exhausted, despite the fact that it was only around noon. He sighed as he closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, pointedly ignoring the email from Elias. For once, he couldn't attribute his exhaustion to reading statements. No, this was just plain old, completely mundane, running around and buying as many small CO2 extinguishers as he and Tim could get their hands on over the past 3 hours. He would have gone with Martin again, but it seems he overslept. Probably for the best. John was pretty sure he made quite the fool of himself last night, gushing over Martin like some kind of schoolboy. It was fine. Fortunately, he managed to control most of his exhaustion-fueled impulses, so hopefully he hadn't scared off Martin too much. Still, his nerves felt raw from last night. He had yet to see Martin today, and wasn't sure if it was a good or bad thing. He knew he was here. Sasha mentioned him running by the library to see if there were any resources on Michael, but John had yet to see him. How could things be going so smoothly and be such a mess at the same time? It made John's head hurt. He cracked an eye open, and finally decided it was about time he read and responded to the email Elias sent him. The last thing he needed was for Elias to get impatient and spy on him more than he already did. To John. From Elias. Subject: Use of Institute debit card. Hello. While I'm quite glad you have found a solution to the worm problem you and your assistants have been dealing with on your own, I do have to insist that next time you tell me before you use the Institute debit card provided to you. I understand the purpose of the card is so that you can order office supplies, and CO2 canisters are, technically, office supplies. However, going around to all the stores in a 30-mile radius and buying a total of 64 of them seems a bit excessive. I do trust your judgment, John. I just wonder if perhaps the stress of your position is causing you some psychological distress. Your assistants and I have noticed a tendency to overwork yourself, so I would like to kindly remind you that you do have vacation days, and the Institute can recommend some counseling services if you feel you need them. In conclusion, please refer back to the Institute policy on proper debit card usage in the future. I do not want to have to rescind your access to it, John. Take care. Elias Bouchard. John groaned, as if he could trust any counseling services recommended to him by Elias. Besides, what exactly would he tell them? John gritted his teeth as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. After thinking it over for a few more minutes, he sat forward in his chair and began to type out his response. However, when he was only around halfway through his reply to Elias, he heard voices coming from further into the archives. John glanced up from his laptop to the open doorway as the voices seemed to get louder, approaching his office. One of them was distinctly Martin. The other voices? Sounded familiar, although he couldn't immediately place who they were. Their voices were male, a bit gruff, and distinctly Cockney. Oh no. John cringed as he realized a moment before the pair arrived at his office. They were just as nearly inhumanly tall as they were the first time, looking almost entirely identical in a way that could be explained as them being twins, if John didn't already know better. Beacon and Hope. You're not supposed to be here. Martin trailed after them as the pair hunched over to fit through John's door. John swallowed hard as he tried and failed not to be intimidated, his mind flashing back to a fist in his guts and being thrown like a rag doll into the back of a van, his body slamming into a wooden coffin that begged for him to open it for the hours it took to arrive at the Wax Museum. He could feel himself sweat. He grabbed his own hand so hard it hurt. Excuse us, Brakeman started. Are you the archivist? Hope finished. This isn't the archives, aren't... John felt his heart leap into his throat. It's all right, Martin, he spoke up, not taking his eyes off the pair, who were now looming over his desk, for even a moment. Yes, I am the archivist. John? Martin asked, confused and a bit afraid. Perfect. Won't take up your time, they continued. Right. John glances between the pair, barely suppressing his flinch as Breakin or Hope's hand moved toward him, a small parcel in his hand. Package for Johnson Sims. Just need a signature. John nodded as he reached for a pen on his desk, desperately ignoring how his hand was trembling. Of course. He very carefully signed for the package on the paper provided. He wasn't even quite sure what the purpose of doing so was. Did Breakin and Hope keep the records? Or was it some kind of thing about them specifically? Is that why they were stuck with the coffin? He furiously shoved the thoughts down as he completed his signature, noticing out of the corner of his eye how Martin was silently edging past the pair and closer to John. Was that all? John asked as he tentatively took the package from the stranger's hands. No, other packages or, signatures? Yeah, delivered a table as well. Was it too big to bring down? So we left it with reception. All right, then. I'll just look into that. John took a shaky breath and gave an even shakier smile. So thank you for the, delivery. No problem at all. You have a nice day, they both spoke. The pair nodded at him, their expressions jovial as John held his breath. They lumbered their way out of the room, and it was only when John heard them exit the archive that he found he could breathe again. Just John? Martin finally spoke up, his eyes wide as he stared at him. What the hell was that? That was Breakin and Hope, John swallowed. Martin seemed to pale even further. From the statements? John nodded as Martin let out a shaky breath. What? How? Why are they here? John held up the thin manila package with a trembling hand as he looked at Martin. Just making a delivery. Did you order that? No. Martin looked worriedly between John's face and the package in his hand as they sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, John took a deep breath and began to open the package. Was it as if they didn't know what was inside? Wait! Don't open it! Martin panicked as he surged forward and grabbed John's hand. John felt electricity jolt through his entire body at the contact, his mind stuttering as image of the previous night slammed into his conscious mind. John felt himself flush as Martin began talking once more. What if it's poison or some sort of evil cursed thing? John cleared his throat. I don't think it is. Shouldn't we check? Martin's hands didn't let go, and John felt his mind begin to stall. How? Was all he could choke out while trying desperately to keep his composure. Martin stalled at that as he seemed to realize that he had no idea how to actually check. He turned to call for Sasha before seeming to remember she and Tim were out on follow-up together. He cursed under his breath. It'll be all right. I don't think it's dangerous, John tried to assure him. Oh, Christ, Martin swore as he carefully let go of John's hand, allowing him to think properly again. John slowly and carefully tore open the package. He gently upended the package and let the small golden lighter slide into his palm, keeping the movement slow and deliberate, so as to try to not spook Martin any more than he already was. Martin seemed to be holding his breath as John held the golden web-designed lighter in his hand. He inspected it for Martin's benefit. He already knew what it was, and opened to show Martin the inside. Carefully, he flicked the starter a few times, and Martin flinched back as a small flame flickered to life. They watched for a few seconds before John, in one fluid motion, closed the lighter, smothering the flame. It seems normal. John looked back to Martin as the latter breathed a sigh of relief. Hopefully, Martin looked worriedly at John, and John slid the lighter back into his pocket. Still, why would supernaturally evil deliverymen give you a normal lighter? John knew why. Knew what the web wanted him to do with this lighter. The feeling of the panopticon shuddering and breaking around him reverberated in his bones even now. But he couldn't exactly tell Martin that. I'm more worried about the table, John reflected. The table? Martin furrowed his brow before his eyes widened. The table! I'm going to go check on it, John stated as he stood from his desk and began to quickly leave his office, Martin hot on his heels. Yeah, that's a good idea, Martin followed him. You don't have to come, John looked back at him as they began to climb the stairs. Martin hesitated, his eyes widening, and John immediately wanted to punch himself in the face. Not that I mind, he backtracked. I mean, if you don't want to. No, Martin cut himself off. I prefer to stay together for, safety purposes. He flushed slightly, and John took a precious few moments to admire the color. Of course, John nodded, and they continued their way up the stairs out of the archive. Quickly, they made their way to Rosie's desk, who kindly informed them she had sent the table to artifact storage. The three of them agreed that it was likely for the best. John and Martin made their way to artifact storage, and John mentally prepared himself for the coming conversation with the head of artifact storage. Last time, it was easy to convince her to store the table in artifact storage, but now he needed to convince her to keep it in one of the special quarantine rooms for especially dangerous items. Fortunately, he was prepared for this. He would go in, look at the table, and say he recognized it from a statement, and tell her he had reason to believe a malicious entity lived in the table and it needed to be quarantined until a method of disposal was discovered, all of which was technically true, so he wasn't even in danger of revealing he knew too much. John was ready. He was going to deal with this quickly and make sure that there was no possibility that Sasha would get replaced. All he had to do was calmly explain the issue to the head of artifact storage, and he was sure she'd see his point and err on the side of caution. Then he saw Elias. John barely suppressed his shock as Elias and the head of artifact, Sonia, looked at him. Elias standing with his back to John and Martin with Sonia facing them on the other side of the offending table. Ah, John, it's good to see you. Did you get my email? He greeted John with a smile. John trailed off as he slowly walked towards them, Martin following by his side, curling in on himself slightly as if to try and make himself smaller. I did. I just didn't get a chance to reply what with the deliveries. Speaking of which, Sonia pipes up and gestures to the spider table. Quite right. Elias turned his attention back to the table for a moment before glancing at John, something glinting in his eye. I'm actually quite glad you're here, John. You see, the table was actually addressed to you, so I was wondering what your opinion on what should be done with this is. What? John and Sonia spoke up at the same time. He's not even in artifact storage, Sonia continued. He has no idea what kind of procedures we have. Of course, Elias replied. I'm not proposing we let him entirely decide. I just like his opinion. Sonia huffed, and John frowned. He had prepared for this. He knew what he had to say. He knew what to say and what to do. He knew this was coming. He had prepared for it. But as Elias's stare bored into him, he felt himself swallowing hard. The table, I believe. I recognize it from one of the statements in the archives, John began. A statement? Sonia asked. Yes. It killed and ate a person, I believe. Although after it did so, there was no actual record the person existed. It sort of assumed their place. So this table can kill and replace people, Sonia narrowed her eyes. I believe so, John nodded as his confidence returned a bit. It's highly dangerous, so I would recommend putting it in a separate quarantine room so it can't hurt anyone. If it's so dangerous, why not destroy it? Elias cut in. John felt his stomach plummet. Of course it wasn't going to be that easy. He had no idea what game Elias was playing, but he wasn't deathly thin ice right now. He swallowed hard and turned his attention to Elias, who was smiling as he stared into the recesses of John's soul. I don't think that's a good idea, John countered. Why not? Elias continued. If the table is so dangerous, the last thing we want is Institute staff to be killed and replaced by it. Well, John desperately searched for an explanation that would make sense. We don't know what would happen if we destroyed it. If that would stop it, or free it, Free it? Elias' smile widened. If the problem is the table, how would destroying the table free it? John felt his blood pressure spike. It wasn't clear in the statement if it was the table itself, or, something in the table. Something in the table, Elias pressed, much to please. What makes you think there would be something in the table? Well, John felt his mind race as he wrenched his eyes away from Elias and to the table. He desperately tried to think of any explanation that would work. Anything he could say to get Elias to just stop and listen to him, to stop pushing and just leave him alone. But unfortunately, it was at that moment Martin decided, for one reason or another, to step forward next to John. Martin was so close to him that he could feel his body heat radiating off of him, and suddenly he found his thoughts a mix of desperate scrambling and just Martin's name on repeat. It made focusing on anything impossible as he felt his breathing pick up slightly. Well, it's just that table, John began to stammer, not even sure what exactly he was trying to say. He hazarded a glance back at Elias, and immediately realized it was a mistake, as Elias now looked at him with barely hidden amusement and a cocked eyebrow. Fuck. He knows about his feelings for Martin now. John's mind then flooded with the constant litany of incoherent swearing and the desire to just break the table in front of him with his head and to knock them, kill all of them, just so he could escape this conversation. John? He heard Martin ask from over his shoulder. John felt physically dizzy from the chaos inside his head. Or maybe it was from the hyperventilation. When had he started that? Everything was going out of focus, and he was beginning to have a hard time trying to remember where he was or why he was there. He wanted to be in his office, away from this awful table, and he lighted his eyes, and Sonia, who was pretty sure he was having some kind of stroke right now. Are you okay, John? Sonia asked. Should we call an ambulance? John spoke up, but had to stop to catch his breath. I'm going to my office. That's probably for the best, Elias replied, as pleased as ever. John practically ran out of the room as he tried to make his way back to his office in the haze. The world was spinning, and he was moving his feet on instinct, letting his muscle memory tell him where to go. God, he was pathetic. He faced down the end of the world, and he was panicking over a fucking table, and Elias, stupid, pathetic waste of air. How was he supposed to protect everyone when he couldn't even hold a simple conversation? John! John felt himself being spun around near the top of the stairs in the archive, Martin desperately searching his face, his expression worried. Stupid John, look what you've done now. Martin's terribly upset, and it's all your fault, you useless bastard. John mumbled. I'm sorry, Martin. What? Martin asked. Well, why are you sorry? You're upset, John replied. It's my fault. I'm sorry. Martin looked utterly bewildered right now, likely because John was acting stupid again, implying he was ever acting smart. Idiot. Can't even console Martin correctly. Can't do anything right. Can't even hold a simple conversation right. Now Sasha was going to die, and it was all his fault because he couldn't keep it together for 5 goddamn minutes. He couldn't wait to tell him that. Hate him? I know you like Sasha, but I'm too useless to talk to Elias. So now she got eaten and you can't remember her. Sorry, John. Focus on me, okay? Martin said from right in front of him, and they were sitting on a break room couch. I think you're having a panic attack. No, John shook his head. I'm not. I'm just... he mumbled. John, look at me. Martin coaxed him to look back at John. John hadn't even realized he'd look away. Can you tell me 5 things you can see? John didn't know why it was worth Martin trying to help him. He'd just bring Martin down with him into the hell that was coming. Maybe it was better he had just stayed away. Let Martin find someone better than him. Someone normal. Someone that wouldn't hurt him. John, stay with me, Martin squeezed his hand. 5 things you can see. It wasn't worth the trouble. It would never be worth the trouble. But Martin, dear, sweet, beautiful Martin, seemed to still want to try. The least he could do was whatever he asked. "You," John mumbled. "Good," Martin brightened. "4 more." He let his eyes wander. "The cabinets, the microwave, the, table, and the ceiling light." "That's great," Martin smiled at him, and John felt his insides melt a bit. "Now, 4 things you can touch. Your hands." John looked down at where Martin was holding his hands for the 3rd time in 24 hours. Martin squeezed reassuringly, and John sighed pleasantly. "The couch, and, I guess, my shirt and trousers. Those work," Martin encouraged him. 3 things you can hear." "Your voice," John replied. "The light." His eyes glanced to the old light, which always made a concerning electrical buzzing noise. "And the clock?" "You're doing so well, John. But we're almost done. What are 2 things you can smell?" "Tea and dust," John replied. "1 thing you can taste?" Martin asked. John suddenly had the nigh overwhelming urge to kiss Martin. He shook his head, dismissing the impulse. "Coffee. From earlier." Martin nodded. "How are you feeling?" "But better." John gave him a tight smile. "Thank you, Martin." "Of course," he smiled back, much more genuinely. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes." John breathed as he practically deflated into the couch. Martin gave his hands one last squeeze before he stood and began the process of making them tea. John tried not to let the disappointment of the loss show on his face. "So, Martin asked as he put the kettle on. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but do you have panic attacks often?" "I don't think so," John replied. "Sure. He often cried himself to sleep and got lost in all the awful things he did and was, but he wasn't sure if those were panic attacks, and even if there were, there was no reason to bother Martin with them." "Okay," Martin nodded. "Do you, know what triggered it?" John's mind flashed back to Elias's amused gaze as John writhed in front of him like a pinned insect. Was it Elias?" Martin carefully asked, his voice soft and light as he kept his gaze on the kettle. John swallowed hard. "Yes," Martin nodded. That's not very good. But I kinda get it. I mean, I'd freak out if he was staring at me like that, too," he laughed. But it was far too awkward sounding to be genuine. "He doesn't always look at you like that, does he?" "Like what?" John asked. Martin spun around to look at him. "What do you mean, like what? Did you not notice how he was looking at you?" "Smug?" John asked, and Martin frowned. "So he's always looking at you like that." Martin muttered to himself, then looked back at John as he tried to explain. "It wasn't, like, smug. Well, it kind of was, but it was like, I don't know, you were a prized show dog of his that he was pleased with. Like, something about it. It felt like you saw you more like an object than a person, I guess. It made me really uncomfortable. That's why I, stepped closer, but I guess that didn't really help." Martin cringed. "Sorry, I didn't realize my being so close to you would freak you out more." "No," John immediately cut off. You didn't have to apologize for that. It's not your fault." "Still, I made things worse," Martin shrugged. "You also helped me. Thank you for that, by the way," Martin laughed. "Of course I did. I wasn't just going to let you have a panic attack." John opened his mouth to retort the many times people had, in fact, just let him cry himself out. But he ultimately decided bringing that up would probably not help. "Still," John said as Martin began to pour the hot water into the cups. "Thank you." "It's no problem, John," Martin smiled. "I'm sure you would have done the same." "I would," John agreed in a heartbeat before cringing. "But I'm not, the best with these sort of things. I'm not even sure exactly what you did." "Oh," Martin looked at him. "That was just a 5-4-3-1 grounding technique. It's really helpful. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. If you ever have a panic attack and I'm not around, use that, and it should help." "Right," John nodded. "Thank you." "Of course, John," Martin smiled, his voice fond, and John suddenly had a flashback of Martin in Scotland, his eyes and smile impossibly fond, glittering as the morning sunshine bathed him and 2 mugs of tea on the counter in front of him. John's heart squeezed and he blinked back tears. Martin pressed the mug into John's hands, and John's gaze shot up to find Martin right in front of him. John was once again struck with the urge to kiss him. He viciously bit the inside of his cheek to resist the impulse. It was still too early. Martin sat down in the chair across from him on the couch, and they both enjoyed their tea in comfortable silence. Sasha and Tim soon joined them and began regaling them of their tale of mundane shenanigans that John was more than happy to listen to. It was nice, and did wonders to calm his nerves, so by the time John made his way back into his office, he was nearly entirely calm. Then he saw the email from Elias. Subject: the table in artifact storage. Hello, John. I'd like to thank you for your insights on what should be done in order to properly protect staff on the matter of the strange table delivered to the Institute today. I would have thanked you properly, but you seemed quite upset earlier, so I thought it would be best to let you leave. I'm attaching some resources for counseling services to this email. I realize your mental health is your own business, but it's beginning to affect your work performance, and I really must insist you speak to a professional about this. I'm also attaching another document you might find helpful. I would like to inform you your concerns were noted and taken seriously, as you seemed very insistent on it. Zebo has been moved to one of the many quarantine rooms in artifact storage to keep it safe for further study until a solution to its potentially murderous tendencies has been discovered. Do take care of yourself, John. Attachment. Institute of Affiliated Counseling Services.pdf. HR Relationships and the Workplace Policy.pdf. This time, John gave in to his urge to repeatedly bang his head against the table.